This is J. Krishnamurti's 6th seminar with scientists at Brockwood Park, 1974.
I had expected to be called on at yesterday afternoon's session, and if I had been, I would have spoken extemporaneously, but having been given a reprieve, I decided to write down what I wanted to share with you, which I think is a very good example of Sudarshan's law, that papers are not written until the actual moment of their delivery.
This is after the moment of
delivery. This goes beyond the law. I felt drawn to the theme of this conference as a consequence of 3 significant failures in my own life, which at the time I thought were due to my own failings, but which I now feel are perhaps related, at least somewhat in part, to the limitations of science, limitations that each of us in our own way are trying to talk about. Now, before telling you about these 3 failures, I would like to throw still another metaphor in the hopper in the hope that it will illustrate my way of thinking about the role of knowledge in the transformation of man and society. We start out in this world as a more or less undifferentiated glob of protoplasm, and our task appears to be to evolve into a human being having a place in a complex technological society. Now, if we shift to a metaphorical mode, we're up to our collective necks in deep water. To save ourselves from going under, we reach out for support with our right hand, or with our right hand only, and grasp at what we think are a succession of solid structures. This is the master hand, the hand that enables us to master nature, to see the world as object and deal with the world objectively. This is the hand of science, as science has come to be practiced. There is an awareness of the existence of a left hand, and on occasion it flails about in the water. It is not seen as equal in strength and power to the right hand, rather it is seen in a somewhat negative light. It is labeled the sinister hand, and is simply regarded as not being the right hand. Using only the right hand, we do achieve a differentiated state, but one that never quite gets us out of the water, so that we continue to struggle atomistically against the forces tending to pull us under. Using both hands together in complementary fashion, however, will not only get us out of the water, but will also bring us to that state of differentiation where we will begin to be able to tackle the really important question of coming together on dry land in order to get on with the business of exploring and enjoying the universe together. And that's the end of the metaphor. Now, if you still want to call the use of both hands in getting us out of the water science, you can, I suppose, but it would be quite a bit different from the science we now know. It would move from its preoccupation with nature as object to be mastered to a concern with what it is that has been mastered, and conversely what it is that has been omitted. That is, the sensuous aspect of man and nature, and the price that we have paid for this one-sidedness in human terms. There have been various ways of noting this duality apart from the right brain, left brain dichotomy implied in the metaphor. We've heard a number of these referred to in the course of this meeting: the way of science versus the way of mysticism, the categorizing versus the contextual mode of information processing. Others speak of objective knowledge versus sensuous knowledge, the active mode versus the receptive mode, and so on. The terminology I find most congenial is borrowed from the formulations of a psychiatrist not too well known, Andras Angiel. He characterized the 2 essential trends in the human organism as the striving for autonomy, that is, the self-organizing, self-enhancing, self-determining tendency, and the striving for homonomy, by which he meant the need to relate to and feel a part of a larger whole. The methods of objective science appear to have evolved in connection with the former, whereas our capacity for love and our aesthetic expression seem to be more related to the latter. My point is that science has paid...
Just could you repeat the word that you contrasted with autonomy?
Autonomy and homonomy. The methods of objective science appear to have evolved in connection with the former, whereas our capacity for love and our aesthetic expression seem to be more related to the latter. My point is that science has paid too little attention to man's homonymous needs and there are too far psychoanalysts around to pick up the pieces. Now, the three areas of failure that I referred to earlier are areas where, presumably, the scientific method should work, but where, in my experience, it falls somewhat short of the mark. In each instance, my feeling is that the failure is traceable not to the flaws of the scientific method, but to the lack of an effective complementary approach. Failure number one is the general field of psychiatry. I'm a psychiatrist by profession. A significant transformation occurred in my life when I allowed myself the realization that psychiatry was not a part-time affair, that its practice was more of an art than a science, and as such it demanded a total commitment, and that the level at which one pursued it could not be divorced from the lifestyle of its practitioners. I will not go into the evidence in support of this except to call your attention to several beginning trends in this direction, as Ronald Lang's effort to provide a total environment at Kingsley Hall, Maxwell Jones in his evolution of the therapeutic community at Dingleton Hospital, and now in the States, among the young at least, a movement known as radical therapy. Failure number two has to do with the longest unsuccessful courtship in history, the near century-old effort on the part of a handful of serious scientists and scholars of all kinds to woo the interest of and acceptance by the scientific establishment so that the romance could be legitimated and ultimately consummated between parapsychology and science. While still in college, I discovered that men like William Crookes, William James, Charles Richet, Oliver Lodge, Henri Bergson, and many others took a serious interest in what was then called psychical research. Add to that the fact that in the course of experimenting over a 2-year period with some fellow students, and this goes back almost 40 years, I came upon what I felt were rather remarkable and genuine paranormal phenomena. And you have what for a young person was the makings of a terrible dilemma. The result, of course, was that I felt impelled to build a special psychic closet in which to house this particular skeleton. Only in recent years, in response to a changing scientific ambience, have I gently opened the door. Someday it may be possible to transform the skeleton to a full-bodied creature able to walk out of the closet by himself. Now, the final failure was linked to perhaps the most profound transformation, at least of my professional life. It was my realization that Freud's theory of dreams was wrong. Lest this sound both immodest, which it probably is, and disrespectful, which it is not meant to be, let me hasten to add that his was a magnificent theory, magnificently presented, and it did call attention to certain therapeutically useful features of dreams. Freud, in my opinion, in his determination to build a scientific psychology, approached dreams through the wrong mode. It was like trying to pick up a mixture of water and solids with a sieve. Much is lost in the process. Unfortunately, the very magnificence of Freud's work cast a long, paralyzing shadow on the subject for well over 50 years, although Jung and others did sense a little of the nature of the stuff that was escaping Freud's container. Without going into details of an alternate theory of dreaming, let me emphasize that I regard dreams as creative and aesthetic experiences that depict in the form of visual metaphors the present state of our connections and disconnections with the world about us. What I would like to do, however, is share with you a kind of fringe benefit that I picked up here at this conference. And I've picked this up from some of the things I've heard David Bohm say in the course of informal conversations between sessions. For some time, I had been toying with the idea that what we experienced as a dream had an antecedent history in an event that was beyond time and space ordering, and that came upon us in something approaching an instantaneous happening at critical moments in the transformation of one form of consciousness into another. The onset of the dreaming phase is one such critical nodal point. Now, if you look at the rough diagram I put on the board, The black dot at your left represents this event. It may be regarded as a kind of black hole of the psyche, containing an enormously condensed information mass. Since this falls completely outside the realm of our ordinary information processing capacities, it is experienced as ineffable. We are forced to let it expand, as it were, or unfold, and then deal with it in bits and pieces, ordered as best as we can in time and space. These are the visual images that make up the dream, and they're depicted by the various shapes on the board. This information is still highly condensed, but less so than formerly, and is spread out, at least in some measure, before us. Now, a second transformation occurs when we reach the waking state. Here we try to transform this private experience into a public mode. This requires a further unfolding of the information contained in the images and the translation of this information into a public medium of exchange, namely language. Here is where we get into trouble, because the information goes beyond what can be conveyed in a discursive mode. Much of the information is more readily felt than described. Moreover, the engagement with the information at a feeling level is an experiment in growth. That black hole contains with it our personal expanding universe, and we do ourselves and the universe an injustice when we try to reduce it to a play of instincts. David Bohm's comments have both provided me with a language fitting to this process, namely the successive transformation of implicate into explicate, but even more important, a sense of support from another domain in the world of physics, for what is simply an intuitive surmise on my part. What is implicate at one stage becomes explicate at the next stage, through a process of unfolding, and what is explicate at this stage becomes implicate for the next stage. Now, if we use dreams simply as illustrative of a broader range of phenomena unattended to or inadequately attended to by the present focus of scientific inquiry, then four general features of these phenomena, this alternate mode, emerge. One, they are more readily appreciated than interpreted. Psychiatrists should have courses in dream appreciation rather than dream interpretation. Two, they share with all aesthetic experiences the quality of transcending space and time. Three, their specific domain is the connective tissue between people, the underlying matrix of human existence, the sense of contact or contactlessness between people. And four, they are all, in one way or another, the creative embodiment of an unpremeditated response to novelty. Dreams provide us with perhaps our most familiar experience with this in the way our dreams capture appropriate, socially derived images to express subjective events. Now, I'd like to just dwell on this for another minute or two because it's a subject that fascinates me. What is the agency that provides this unending source of unerringly apt visual metaphors? Because that's what the images in our dreams really are. I don't think we honestly know the answer to this question, but I do know how easy it is to gloss over our ignorance by attributing the whole process to some reified internal demon, variously known as our unconscious or simply our id. Perhaps a prior question would be, what is the nature of the process involved in the selection and organization of the visual images with which we build the content of our dream consciousness? If we look at the process simply, that is, without an allegiance to deeply embedded theoretical biases, we seem to be involved in a rather intriguing process. We seem to be able to bring together a selected array of bits and pieces of past social data that have become known to us over the course of our personal life history, and then to arrange these data in a spatial and temporal ordering bearing no relationship to their original time-space frame of reference, but one which, on the other hand, enables them, through the personal transformation we have effected, to rather precisely, dramatically, and effectively express the particular interplay of feelings mobilized by a current, unresolved life situation. Social reality makes a significant contribution to our dreams. It provides us with a very special kind of building blocks it takes to capture and express one or another aspect of our subjective life. When you stop to think about it, it takes a rather high level of creative and organizational ability to tap our own internal computer for the appropriate bits with which to solve the puzzle, and then to arrange them in a way that makes sense as a kind of emotional template, highlighting a problematic aspect of our immediate existence. Having gone thus far, we are almost forced to admit that the powers displayed by our dreaming selves far exceed the scope of our waking faculties. The comparison is, of course, unfair, since each is supreme in its own domain. One is not better than the other. Each in its own domain is a powerful way of grasping different aspects of our existence. Our problem is that we have paid more attention to the one than to the other. This view of our dreams suggests that we are capable of looking quite deeply into the face of reality and of seeing mirrored in that face the most subtle and poignant features of our constant struggle to transcend our own personal, limited, self-contained, autonomous self, so as to be better able to connect with and be part of a larger unity. Just as someone once said that our eyes came into existence as nature's means of seeing itself, so perhaps our dreams may be viewed as an instrument created by society to see itself and its distortions reflected in one of its own creations. We cannot understand the level and range of creativity displayed in this manner as having its source in the individual alone. It has to be understood as a function of the individual and society. More specifically, the dream comes about because, in the interest of reaching out toward this sense of unity, each of us has tuned our psyche to an exquisitely sensitive pitch in its capacity to store and use what we have seen, heard, and learned intuitively of the world about us, as vehicles for expressing everything from passion to prejudice. The world endlessly nourishes and replenishes these creative juices, although for some of us they only come out at night, and for all of us they are far more discerningly honest at night. Now I think I'll stop here. I think I've used my time. I have a longer paper.
Thank you.
Give sometimes that.
I just say about the word homonymous, there is a word used in mathematics, holonymous, which means essentially the same thing, the law of the whole. Does anybody want to...
We didn't hear what you said.
The word is holonymous, holonymy meaning the law of the whole, autonomy, the law of the self.
Okay. That's the meaning.
Yes, you want to comment?
Possibly, I could begin by asking you a bit about this black dot,
Right.
the source of the whole process. Now, is that, do you consider that condensed body of knowledge is condensed from one's own experience, or has it some mystical quality about it? Is it a shared knowledge of the community that is somehow present?
You're asking questions that are very difficult to answer. If I put my experience in dream work together with my parapsychological experience, including laboratory investigations, I would say that that black dot picks up information that goes beyond the individual, even though that information is not always manifest and perhaps is rather seldomly manifest, but that there is that capacity inherent in this information compacting process.
Is there, have you evidence of this fact in the content of people's dreams? That,
Well,
in fact,
this is at this point only a somewhat wild, imaginative inference. There is some perhaps indirect evidence. One of the things that has puzzled me about dreams, mainly from my own experience, because people don't usually attend to it or report it, and I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere in the literature. But when I do mention it to others, I get consensual validation that this is a fact about dreams, namely that not infrequently in the course of our dreaming, at least I feel sometimes confused as to whether a sequence that I'm looking at came at the beginning or in the middle or at the end or both, or in other words, as if there was some confusion as to what the actual sequence was, which suggests perhaps that we are creating the sequence and that it's all given to us and we're trying to make sense out of it. Now, the other bit of indirect evidence, is not really evidence, and it's only something that suggested this formulation, is that there is some discrepancy between the time element involved in dreaming. That when this factor was looked at in a laboratory, how long do dreams take? Are dreams instantaneous or not? The laboratory evidence seemed to suggest that the dream in the dreaming takes about as long as you would expect that content to take in working itself out. On the other hand, there are anecdotal reports that dreams can, under certain circumstances, be almost instantaneous creations. That is, there's a famous dream on record of a Frenchman named Maurice who awoke when a bedpost fell on his neck and caused a sudden awakening. Well, he awoke with a rather long, complicated dream that in the course of what was happening during the French Revolution, he was arrested, he was thrown into jail, he was tried before a court, he was sentenced to be guillotined, he was taken out of prison, he was dragged through the streets, he was led up to the guillotine, and then the guillotine fell. Well, that suggests that perhaps that dream came about possibly in response to the bedpost falling on his neck. Well, these are only the bits and pieces. I became interested in the parapsychological question from my experience as a psychoanalyst and from an earlier experience as a college student, and felt that from time to time I was the recipient at the other end of the couch of what seemed to me to be a telepathic dream from a patient. And this then led me into an effort to confirm this within a laboratory setting using the rapid eye monitoring technique. And I think our work has supported the reality of the telepathic dream.
Excuse me, what do you call a telepathic dream?
A dream that incorporates information that could not be known to the dreamer at the time, by inference, by any known means of communication, and so
on. Do you have any evidence or any perhaps feeling about the possibility that the dreaming faculty could actually be used to extend our knowledge of this implicate order and the sort of nature of our being as entities beyond the normal conventions of space and time? That's a rather big one, but I'm just wondering if that's the direction in which you would regard the proper use of the dream faculty as
well, I'm afraid I can only give you a rather general answer to that, in the sense that in the past 2 years, for example, I have had a very gratifying experience in working with lay people who are completely unsophisticated and untutored in the theory of dreaming, in helping them move closer to their own dreams, and have felt that this kind of work does open their selves open, does open their inner being in a way that is growth enhancing. It does give them a sense of their own creativity that they had absolutely no awareness of before. That's a very general answer to your question, but there is something I hesitate to use the word spiritual, but there is something about working with dreams this way in a group that does liberate some a sense of excitement, a sense of growth, a sense of coming together, a sense of communality.
Pribram?
I think this is a very exciting turn of events you've described in your own interpretation of dreams, or non-interpretation, whatever you want to call it. It calls up two things. I think that I have a question of David Bohm, first of all, whether mathematically the implicate order is as concentrated as that. I've always thought of it as an extended thing, but that may already be the first quantization, the holographic one, which I'm thinking of. As far as the neurology of dreaming, Freud himself felt that at least it's hard to know just how to express this, but he certainly would have agreed with you that what is happening is that the association, that it's, well, a primary process, which is therefore an associative process rather than a cognitive constructional process of that sort. And he would, I'm quite sure from at least what's said in the project, talks about the associative function of these bits and pieces, which happen to lie near each other in the nervous system. But what he didn't have is the fact that the bits and pieces are stored holographically. That is, that there's a distributed store, and so that there is, well, the next thing that, the question that I would have to pose is whether the holographic store is haphazard or not. When we take a look at a hologram, it looks haphazard. We know that we can, by doing another quantization, bring it into an image, a formed image. But what determines where a bit of, quotes, information is stored in the holographic plate or in the nervous system? Is this really haphazard, or is it lawful? And if it's lawful, what are the rules? All we know now is that it's distributed. And what I thought, always have felt, that in the last 10 years or so, that dreams indicate is simply the holographic organization, and that's sort of what you're saying there. It's the first...
use the metaphor of the black hole rather than the hologram.
Well, no, the dreaming doesn't get you the black hole. That gets you the first quantization according to what a hologram is.
Well, I use the black
That's
hole
right.
as a metaphor for the hologram, perhaps, or
No, let's not get that confused. The hologram, according to what David has told me at this
Maybe
meeting...
the second order hologram then, and that the dream is the first order hologram.
Right.
Because, I mean, to answer your questions, you see that as you were pointing out, that the hologram gives an implicate order of the first order, and when you carry it to a second order, it becomes possible to get these highly concentrated forms, what you talk about. And in physics, I think the best analogy would be a very high energy process. Say a cosmic ray having tremendous energy comes in and produces a burst out of which appear an explosion of particles unfolding. And no, was there another question you had?
Which direction are we going?
Right.
In other words, the second quantization gives you ordinary...
It gives you the possibility of a very highly concentrated burst of energy.
But that's what happens in waking. That's what happens. I thought the
I
second...
think that I would look at this dot as the concentrated burst of energy.
Exactly, right. That's my intent.
That's the
right.
first quantization.
That's my intent, you see, that's why I didn't know what you were getting at.
Wait a
That
minute,
is the...
I'm confused
You
now.
got the order to fit wrong.
That's right.
Your arrow was going that
right,
way,
right.
and their
My
arrow
arrow
was
is going this way.
Yeah.
That black dot expands. You're unfolding that black dot.
That's right. I agree to your order, but David has just told us the reverse order.
No, we're agreeing on the order.
No.
We are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So that it starts out unfolding is the first quantization gives you the hologram, the second quantization gives you words and images and
No,
objects.
the burst of energy. I think you should put them all together. The second quantization allows this hologram to contain this highly concentrated burst of energy, which can then unfold, as shown in your diagram.
Right.
Now I think David Shainberg is next.
Yeah, I wanted to say, just to follow up what Monty says, I think there is some evidence, at least it's my feeling, that the evidence that comes that we do go through 4D cycles, that there's some sort of transformation in the total body of, that supposedly the dream research has shown that we have that we go through different cycles during the night. And supposedly during some of those cycles there are more dreams, the so-called REM period, and that might have something to do with a kind of total reorganization of the organism, during which time it goes through some sort of undifferentiated phase. In other words, where there is the organism supposedly is cycling during the night, and if it comes to these disorganized moments, like somebody was suggesting the other day that there's a kind of black hole in there where we dip into an undifferentiated moment, that the reorganization out of that would be some dream or some sort of holographic first quantization. In other words, if the body's doing that, then it has to reorganize.
But what David is saying, that doesn't work unless you get to the second quantization, brings about this burst.
It makes it possible to have this burst. You see, if you merely took the hologram, there would be no easy way to get a very highly concentrated thing of this nature.
If you merely took the hologram, you couldn't get this kind of...
Well, not really, no.
Yes.
So what you're saying really is that you're going in two directions from the hologram. One is toward objectifying, and the other is toward this burst.
It can go either both ways, you see.
But where do you start?
Well,
With the hologram.
we don't really. This is merely a way of looking at the whole thing. You see, you don't start, but this is what goes on in there.
Yeah, but there are two models. Now let's get this on the table, because I think there are two models here. One would be going from, as you have it on the board, going from the black dot, black hole, to the hologram, and then to the to objectifying. Well,
there might have been a process before that which brought about this energy that is shown here. You see,
and that comes from the hologram going the other direction.
Right,
so we must have two kinds of transformations: one from the hologram going to the to objectifying, and the other one going
inward.
Inward.
Right.
And so, what we'd look for is during REM sleep is some kind of organization very similar to the waking one, only very different at the same time.
Right.
And
Well, that was the next thing I
That's
wanted
what
to
you're
say.
saying.
Yeah,
That's why I
because
brought it
I've
up.
been working somewhat in dreams in this, following along with what Karl has been talking about, and there is some evidence, I think, if you look at dreams in some way, there is, and you talk to people about their dreams in an intimate way, every element of the dream seems to mirror every other, very much as you see in a hologram. In other words, if a patient came in the other day and she talked about the fact that a friend of hers, who was also a friend of someone else's that was working with me in analysis, she'd had the dream in which this friend had ruined a photograph that her mother had done. Now, when you put it all together, you found that everything about her feeling at that moment was ruined. The feeling about the friend was ruined. The feeling about the photograph was ruined. The feeling about working with me was ruined. Everything in her life turned out to feel like it was ruined. So in a sense, the dream was kind of like a hologram, repeating itself continually over and over again. And the third thing I wanted to say is that when you do work with dreams, some of the work that we do when we talk to patients, rather than analyzing dreams, for instance, if you use the dream more or less as an illuminator to open up bigger areas. For instance, a patient will say, let's say this woman had talked about the feeling of ruined. If you ask her a question that doesn't talk about information and say, what is ruined. You talk more about opening up her feeling of feeling ruined or ruining. In some way, that kind of language opens up into this feeling of a kind of open energy, so that then she seems to make contact with wider and wider areas of her personality. So it's almost like what you're talking about, getting into a bigger energy flow.
Can I respond to David? Well, I agree in part with what you say about different aspects having this holographic quality. As a matter of fact, this is the basis of Fritz Perl's Gestalt approach to dreams, because he'll just pick an element and push that element into a life experience and get corroborative evidence from everything else in the dream. But I think that's only true in part, and I don't think it quite does justice to the range of metaphors as they are brought into play. You see, a dream is not just a presentation of a metaphor or the presentation of several metaphors. A dream is a presentation of metaphors, visual metaphors in motion. And that motion is the result of a dialectical process in which you have opposing forces at play. I mean, this is what Freud's sense of and I think this is basic, that you have, and this is what I meant by the response to novelty, you have the impact of novelty on an existing system, and the metaphors reflect that impact. So you can't just say that one metaphor reflects all that's going on. It reflects a range of information about something going on, but there's also a range of metaphors that touch on other subjective aspects of the process.
I think we'll take Sudarshan's point.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I feel exquisitely pained to hear holograms discussed in this rather loose fashion. I think the metaphors are getting mixed up. Hologram is a transformation from one optical image or optical item of information by a Fourier transformation which comes about by a natural process of passage according to the laws of wave optics. It is transformation from one set to the other set, and there is really no difference between the two. It is almost as if you translate from English to French. There are some limitations of language that would be involved, so that if you retranslate it, part of the information would be lost. Now, this transformation is a consequence of the wave nature of things as expressed in terms of ordinary quantum mechanics, in which the position coordinate is something that is seen as geometrical coordinate, and the momentum is then related to the conjugate variable to this one. There are entirely different contexts in which you have abstract quantum variables which are not seen in this particular fashion. For example, in the notion of second quantization, when you introduce levels of a certain system, the variable which is conjugate to the thing is not often seen. Either you have one picture of seeing in which you see many particles, many photons, or many protons, or many electrons. And in that kind of seeing, you do not see the conjugate variable which is corresponding to the variable of coordinate or momentum. You see something entirely different. In the same sense that if you are thinking about an ordinary oscillator which goes back and forth, if you see either position or coordinate momentum, then you see a certain kind of picture. But if you see it in terms of excitation levels of the system, then you see a different kind of picture. So it seems to me it would be risky to elaborate a dream theory in terms of these loose metaphors. At the first level, quantization level, it is fine, because it says that instead of the information being in a certain visual fashion, when it gets transformed and seen on another screen, it would look a little different, and if you did not know the code, you would not see any correspondence between these two. But if you do know the code, there is absolutely no difference in the content of the information between these. All you have to do is to simply re-Fourier transform this particular thing, and you see this one. So it's up to you for he who knows the code, there is no difference. For he who does not see the code, there is no correspondence. So there is no randomness in the thing unless you have lost the key. If you have lost the key, then of course it's completely random. You would never figure out what happened. It is not a case like a jigsaw puzzle in which things are misarranged. It is like a secretary and her boss filing things according to different principles. It is the same information that is here is also here with regard to it.
And so the key is where? In the hologram?
Key is the wave propagation.
Right.
Therefore, if you retransform, you simply take the picture here and then illuminate it then the original picture reappears on the next screen that you happen to have with regard to the thing. So it is not a case of randomness or information being lost from one case to another. Now, if you therefore use the hologram language with regard to dreams, then either one is meaning about the actual electrodynamics of the situation in which you say the electrical stimuli go in a certain fashion. That's of course an external observation of what happens with regard to the material called the brain. With regard to, or one could talk about, I suspect that this picture was not about waves in the brain, but rather in terms of, or we can say that in fact in dreams you have a sort of imagery, a new kind of language in which what is not acceptable is retransformed so that it gets past the senses in terms of transformation. But in that case, of course, again, dreams contain no more information. There is nothing creative with regard to the thing except that you are able to get it past the senses. But if I were to follow what I have gathered from Dr. Ullman, it is not a case of dreams being simply transcriptions of waking state things, but that they are more creative, because you say it is explicative, implicative mode, that there is more in the dream than there is in the waking state. It is not merely a transformation of something that would have occurred in the waking state. Is that right? If that is the case, then the hologram analogy with regard to the transformation between this, not the process, transformation between these two is inadequate.
Well, no, I didn't use a holograph. That was, I think, introduced by Karl or Dave or both. But to answer your question directly, I think that I think it's the same brain when we're asleep and when we're awake. We don't introduce new experience when we go to sleep. So whatever it is we're dealing with, our accumulated experience, but we're looking at it in a way that I think makes our creative potential more visible. We are simply using a brain organized differently electrically or in some way, and therefore able to reflect in the form of highly condensed visual images much more about our experience than is easily accessible to us in the waking state. The whole purpose of using dreams in therapy is to get precisely at that information, you see. Mm-hmm. You don't create the information, you get at it.
Are you saying, sir, if I may ask, that there is a dreaming self separate from the waking self?
No, I'm saying that you experience yourself differently while dreaming. Then you're the same self, but you experience yourself differently.
So, if one is totally awake during the day, quote, awake,
yes,
then would you dream at all?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because all dreaming is a form of consciousness that we have that comes upon us when the brain reaches a certain level of arousal. It isn't.
No, I'm just.
Yes, because biologically we know that at certain times during the night, some input into our brain wakes it up enough for consciousness to occur.
So you are saying dreams are necessary?
I didn't say that. I said that this happens. Now, it happens. If it happens, then perhaps there's some...
So, is it also possible not to dream at all? And therefore, have much more energy?
No.
Can I ask, is there any evidence that anyone never dreams?
No. Not that I know of.
Well, I think we have to make a distinction here between the experience of dream and the neurophysiological state which accompanies dream.
Well, but before you get to that, I think the answer to Dr. Wilkins' question is, as far as the laboratory evidence, I don't think we know of any situation where dreaming is completely absent.
But, sorry.
That is to say that almost everyone who has been tested dreams.
Yes.
There's a wide variability in the remembering.
Almost everyone who has been tested
dream.
Even the ones who claim that they do not dream, apparently dream.
But then Globus's distinction becomes important because all that the lab work is showing.
There was some order. Who wants to talk right now?
Well, Krishnamurti.
I think Krishnamurti's been talking and hasn't finished.
Yeah, I haven't finished.
I would like to ask, if during the day, my brain, my activities, physical, moral, ethical, psychological, and so on, aesthetic, are in total order, complete order, and therefore great deal of energy is released because there is no energy when there is disorder. When there is whole order, what is the necessity for dreaming?
Well, the way you're framing the question, I find it difficult to answer because I don't look upon dream consciousness as different than the experience of waking consciousness. It's like asking, what is the necessity for being conscious while we're awake?
No, sir. I'm asking, are dreams a continuity of waking stream?
There's a certain element of discontinuity because the stuff that goes to make up waking consciousness or giving it a certain shape is lacking, namely stimuli from the outside world. That structures our waking consciousness. But the capacity to be conscious is the same. We have the capacity to be conscious when we're dreaming. The only difference is that the input that structures that dreaming is different because the input is internal. It comes from our own fabricated images. Now, I think I grasp the intent of your question, and that is that if we were whole while we were awake...
Yes, that's what my point.
What would the impact of that be on this sleep experience?
Yes.
Well, I can only answer that by comparing the dreams of my wife and myself. Because my wife is a more whole person than I am emotionally. She's usually more there in the situation than I am. I'm more abstracted and more far out and have too many hang-ups. Now, I've been comparing my dreams with my wife's dreams. And my wife... Now, in the course of our daily experience, there are ups and downs. There are differences in feeling tones. There's a variation. Life is not lived at a uniform level. Now, those variations are reflected in her dream in very simple, direct language in terms of real people and real situations. In my dreams, I see flying minotaurs and so on. And there's a difference, you see. I think that gets close to the meaning of your question.
If my life, I'm sorry, I hate to talk about myself, sounds rather silly. If in my life there is order, in daily waking, no contradiction, no conflict, no disorder.
Right.
Therefore, during the waking hours, there is a great release of energy. Not the energy stimulated. Drugs, drink, soap, pills. The natural order brings its own energy.
Right.
And during sleep, is there a different form of energy? Or is it a continuation of that energy of order in a different level of consciousness? I don't know if I'm if I'm making myself clear.
Can I ask Krishnamurti a question? How can you postulate a situation in which there is no disorder in your life when there is so much disorder in the lives of others?
In my life, I can bring order. I know people live in disorder. People around one is in disorder. Can't one be in order, though in spite of others are in disorder?
But how can you separate your life from other people's lives?
I am those people.
But if they're in disorder,
What's up?
But if you are those people, and they are in disorder, there must
and I
be...
try to get out of it. You mean I can't get out of my disorder, my conflict, my misery?
Surely there must be a reflection of their disorder in your life.
Not necessarily, sir.
If you are those people, there must be.
No, if I am those people, can't I disassociate from that disorder? I admit I am those people.
Then in your language, you cease to be those people. As soon as you disassociate, you are no longer them. And
Obviously, if you are in order and I am in disorder, you have disassociated yourself naturally.
But is there something underneath which is
But then Wilkins' point is right. It only makes sense in your terminology to speak of being completely ordered and structured, etc. If you completely isolate yourself from those people.
No, I don't isolate myself.
Well, then you must be in some sort of disorder.
I am associated with others in my relationship to others.
You spoke of responsibility.
What's that?
You spoke of responsibility.
I take responsibility. I am part of, I don't know if I'm using the right language. I am society. The society is me. The culture in which I've been born is myself. And surely I can disassociate myself, can't I, from that culture? Be free of my Hinduism, all the traditions, all the superstitions, all the etc. Can't I disassociate myself?
I think it depends what one means by dissociating.
I mean, in the sense, free myself from the Hindu tradition of with all its superstitions, its unreasonableness, its deities, its orthodoxy, and so on. That's it. If you don't admit that, there is no freedom at all.
You mean you can have a relationship and yet you can still be free?
I think so. Otherwise, our life is utter misery, a continuous misery. So I would like to ask this question. May I pursue this?
Sure.
If during the day, psychologically I bring about order in myself, no conflict, no battle in myself, contradiction, imitation, conformity, break all that, and thereby release a different kind of energy, which is really a form of meditation I won't go into now, then is the sleeping state a different form of energy seeps in or comes in, which during the waking hours is strengthened. I don't know how to... So I have noticed, forgive me, I don't like to talk about myself, I have noticed that in dreams there is interpretation going on at the same time. That's one thing. And I've noticed dreams progress, tell me the future. Dreams that warn me, be careful, this is going to happen. That's, I'm sure it's already happened to all of us. Dreams that are a continuity of the daily activity of disorder, the brain trying to find in that disorder order, and I wake up and say, by Joe, I've solved that problem, therefore there is order, and all that's going on. Yeah. And also, when I notice in oneself, if I may, I put this as a humble, I'm not talking about myself, a state in which there are no dreams at all. And when I wake up, the brain is much more alert, which has been alert during the day. I don't...
Well,
I don't think about the input output.
Well, I want to answer. There's a specific answer. There are two different kinds of dreams, at least. And one is the kind that you've just described, which is a continuation of the daily work. And then this other kind that seems more symbolic and more mixed up. So there are the two kinds, and no one at this point that I know of has studied what the conditions are for producing one kind more than another.
That's what I want to get at.
Yes.
May I introduce some subject which may not be for meditation? May I go into it a little bit? Meditation, you know the whole idea of meditation, so whether it's Zen Buddhism, Hindu forms of meditation, there are many, many systems of meditation. I think generally, as far as I know, it's based on control of thought or modification of thought through fragmentation of another thought. So it's all based on control. Now, the controller is the controlled. So you remove the conflict between the controller and the controlled. When there is a realization, the controller is the controlled. I don't know may I go on? So meditation is a form of, not a form, meditation is a movement in which the contradictions, all that is wiped out. I mean, I have discussed this with so-called people who have spent years and years on meditation, not few days or few months, who have given their life to this. I know a man who was a very high official and all the rest of it in India. He gave it up, and for 25 years he practiced meditation. Gave up everything, you understand, sir? It wasn't a game with him. And when we discussed, he came to see me and when we discussed, he said, I have realized something, that it has been a self-hypnosis. My projections of the visions of my deity and so on, so on, so on, is out of my own, which I never realized before. After 25 years, for a man to say that, you understand, sir? Now, so meditation, it may be totally foreign to all of you, and I hope you'll forgive me if I introduce a subject which you're not familiar with. Meditation is a form of emptying the mind. Without control, and on so on, so on. Now, so during the day, meditation is an act of order. Not conformity to an order preconceived, to a pattern set by reactions or all the rest of it. It's an order that comes with the understanding of disorder, in oneself psychologically. And then the sleeping state gives a different quality of energy which is incorporated during the day. That's all I'm just trying to. Don't want to enter.
We'll have to be careful about that. I mean, I think we'll cancel all previous reservations and we'll have to start again.
Can I just have a point of clarification? I mean, to get holograms clear, I may have misunderstood Dr. Sudarshan's account. I mean, it's essentially a question of classical wave theory, isn't it? I mean, I think you said something about quantum mechanics, but you meant this in another connection.
Yeah, I mean, no, quantum is not necessary. I mean, when one talks about second quantization of the hologram, obviously one is talking about quantum theory. classical optics or classical acoustics.
I wonder if we could leave the hologram aside. You see, just put an explanation of developing a different view of quantum theory in which the hologram is being used as an image. But I think that we should leave this aside now because another question has come up meanwhile. And now we have to start. Yes, Globus.
I think Krishnamurti is quite correct in what he is saying, and I think a careful reading of Freud will support it. And I think there's an important distinction to make here, and that is between the neurophysiological state of dreaming, which is biologically determined, and which we all go through every night. We need it to live. If we don't have it, we die, biologically determined, and the dream, which is an experience associated with that neurophysiological state. Now, if one lives one's waking life in complete order, I believe that one would have a blank dream. One would go through the biologically determined state, but it would be without any content or experience whatsoever. And I think that would be a highly energizing kind of experience.
Doesn't it happen before you sleep that you put things in order, your life in order, saying, I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that, it should have been said that way.
But that's not order.
No, that is bringing about taking a stock during the day.
Yeah, but that doesn't order necessarily.
I'm coming to that. Taking stock. And the very taking of the stock brings order.
Sometimes.
And if you take stock orderly without condemning, just observing, not saying this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is indifferent, this, but just observing without the observer, if I can put it that way, the facts that have gone during the day. Then, when you do go to sleep, the brain, if I can talk of the brain in front of experts, the brain then hasn't struggled to bring order during the night. Then it has a different quality. It brings about a sense of deep quietness, a sense of deep relaxation. It becomes fresh, young. At least I'm not.
That's the content, but there is content. You see, I think what you said just doesn't.
What is content?
Well, the dream doesn't have to necessarily be in a visual mode. It could be expressive of any feeling in any mode. And I think that the order that you might feel would be translated into the dream at some feeling level. It would be, but you see, what you said about a blank dream, I think is absolutely untenable. In fact, Bert Lewin wrote a paper about the blank dream simply as signifying.
That's a different.
I know, but
Why is it? We have no interruptions, otherwise we're not.
Well, I was interrupted. I was in the middle.
Well, you interrupted me when I interrupted somebody else.
Well, let's cancel all that. Now, I think could we ask Fritjof?
I know of one man. I don't know for sure whether he's real or imaginary. I think he's real, but I know of one man who claims that he can use his dreams as an altered state of consciousness and move in them completely freely and have them under control. And if he chooses so, he can dream or he cannot dream. And when he dreams, the dreams do not have any elements that are not under control, which seems to be the common thing in our dreams, that we don't know how they arise and so on. But he can use them to go places, to do things in an altered state of consciousness. Now, my question is there any evidence, either Krishnamurti in your experience or in your experience with dream work, is there any such evidence for people who have order in their lives that they can have then completely orderly dreams?
Well, I can respond to your question. What you're describing is what is known as the lucid dream. That is where the dreamer knows he's dreaming and then begins to manipulate the dream and his relationship to it. And this then borders on the feeling of being dissociated from your dreaming self and taking off and traveling to other places even. I don't think it has any relationship to the question of order or disorder. It can be a learned technique that some people have made a conscious effort to master and have, so that they can sort of inject this feeling of knowing that they're dreaming and then actually rearranging the dream contents to suit their fantasy.
And there's no connection between their lives and
No, it's simply a technique that they're...
Is it easy to do that?
Some people find it relatively easy.
I've done it since I was 4 years old.
Yeah,
so it can't
yeah,
be.
right.
So, control, you are using the word control in what sense?
The fact that if, for instance, I dream that I'm in Paris, that I can decide to go and see some people in Paris or some places which I know, which I can't normally when I dream. When I dream, I can't influence the content of the dream.
Surely control is the very essence of disorder.
In what sense? I don't understand that.
Who is the controller? Is he not also part of the control? The experiencer is the experience. So when we introduce the word control, it implies duality and therefore conflict. And therefore conflict is the very essence of disorder. Sorry, my language may be...
No, it's just I'm filtering what you're saying through what Karl's saying, and it isn't match.
Can we proceed to David Peat next?
Yeah, I have a question about time, and it's directed to you, and it may be directed to, maybe about what you've been saying. Maybe you could tell me as well. You say there's the implicate, which is either a perception or something given, it just happens. Then after that, there's the explicate, or the unfolding, and it seems, from what I gather what you said, this act of unfolding is also the act of scanning or dreaming. And at this point, time comes in. So it seems that the two operations of the brain, there's the direct presentation, and then there's something which involves scanning things, or trying to understand things, or trying to play them out, which is something to do with time, is it? And is this the...
That's what I was trying to say. Yeah, exactly.
So that
we do two things with time during that dreaming phase. We try to play out this record in time as best as we can, and at the same time, the very images that we create use time and space as metaphors
But
themselves.
they're actually creating time in the dreaming, or in the scanning, or in the explication, or in the...
We're not. I don't understand. In what sense we're creating time? We are translating something that we're trying to latch on to within a given period of time. That biological clock that we have, that Dr. Globus referred to as the biological control of dreaming, that biological clock says you're going to be at this now for about 10 minutes, or 15 minutes, or a half hour. And we have that much time available to us to unravel that implicate. And we use time.
So, is it possible to live a life without control of any psychological, of any kind? Because I think in whole problem time is involved in that. If I'm the biological time, the physical time, and the psychological time, and so on and so on. May I be a little personal, because I don't want to talk about myself, sound out silly. I have never controlled psychologically.
Never.
Psychologically, I'm never controlled. Does it sound odd? You're all very silent.
What do you mean by control?
I must control my desires. I must control my temper. I must control my sexual appetite. I must control my desire to be bigger, little, and all. In the sense, the moment, the recognition that the controller is the controlled, then all this disappears. Not theoretical, but actually in daily life. Because conflict is the essence of disorder, whether between nations, between classes, between people, between families, between husband and wife, that is disorder. When I follow my guru, that is disorder. Psychological, because I want to be like him, I want to experience something which he has, or etc., etc., etc. All that involves time.
I'd like to speak from personal experience of dreams. And every night when I go to sleep, or most nights when I go to sleep, I seem to lie down in bed and thoughts have been running through my head all day. And I see these thoughts continuing to run through my head. And then I keep worrying about how I could have done things better, and I think about what had happened and what this meant and what that meant. And that slowly fades away. And I begin to see pictures. I begin to see these things as pictures instead of thoughts. I see again what happened to somebody, and I see them talking to each other. And then the words disappear and the thoughts disappear, and I still continue to see the pictures. And at this stage I can still hold on to what I'm seeing. And then finally, a kind of a dance of images begins. And then a point comes where I suddenly feel I can't hold on to this anymore. And it's a very frightening moment. And then that passes, and I'm still seeing things which are no longer meaningful. But one thing I certainly know is that I'm conscious, and that I'm seeing those things. And it seems that I've been seeing things like that all day, which were just still dancing around. While I was awake, I was still seeing things like that, that I was conscious of, which I didn't understand, and these are not images of those things that I was seeing all day. These are different things that I'm seeing now, but I did see all day like that as well.
When you say you did see all day, how do you mean that when the images came at you, they were familiar, as if you had seen them during the day?
No, it was the kind of image that they are. They're the kind of image I cannot talk about. So during the day I do not talk about them. I do not relate to people as if I was seeing that way, because I have no words to describe those images.
Right.
And I have no actions either to describe those images.
But you see them in the daytime, nevertheless, as well.
But I see them in the daytime, nevertheless. And I see them in the daytime in the sense that the continuity of consciousness assures me of that. And when I continue further beyond that point, even those disappear, and then it's quite blank.
Right.
And when this first happened to me, I thought, oh my God, I'm not getting any sleep. But now I've discovered that I can get up the next day and go through a day which is just as energetic, and it doesn't really seem to have impaired my ability to rest. And that when people ask me, what were you doing? I say, I was dreaming. And when people ask me, did you sleep? I say, yes, I slept. But in another sense, and to somebody else, I might not say that I slept. Somebody to whom I could describe those images, because there is a commonality of experience. To them I could say, this is what I saw. And then they'd say, well, were you awake at that time? And I would say, yes, I was awake.
Up to a point, what you seem to be describing is a not infrequent phenomenon known as hypnagogic imagery. That is, at the point where you are beginning to experience an altered state of consciousness, thoughts then assume a pictorial mode, and that mode initially immediately reflects the thoughts that preceded it. A psychiatrist named Silberer wrote about this and offered a number of illustrations which show this process and from his own life. For example, he went to sleep one night, and he trained himself to pick up the hypnagogic imagery, and he found himself preoccupied with something he was writing, and the fact that it wasn't flowing and it wasn't as smooth, and it had a lot of rough edges. And he was dissatisfied with it, and that then suddenly at a particular point, he lost those thoughts, and he saw himself in his workshop holding a plane and planing a rough piece of board, getting the rough edges out of it. Well, that was an immediate pictorial representation of the immediately antecedent thoughts. Now, from what we know usually about the cycle that these images follow in relation to dreaming, they don't transform into actual dream images in the sense of these independently moving, interacting images until about 3/4 of an hour or so later, when you then enter another physiological cycle where you actually are dreaming. In other words, these images are relatively quiescent as compared to the activity of dream images later on.
Now, the point I was trying to make was that when I first started sleeping like this, it seemed like I thought I was very disturbed because I thought I wasn't getting any sleep. And I need to sleep. I know I need to sleep. And when I discovered that that it wasn't doing me any harm, I stopped worrying about this. And so this process now continues more evenly by itself. And I don't have any dreams beside those. And sometimes, if you were to ask me what my dreams were, I would describe those to you as my dreams. And I would have to describe them to you as my dreams because I know no other way in which I can describe them to you. But at the same time, they might not be, I don't think of them as dreams.
They are not true dreams.
And I'd like to take Fritjof's point. He asked me the other day, when do I prepare my maths lessons? I don't prepare them. While I'm falling asleep like this, I see what happened in the class during the day. And as I watch it, it sort of falls into a kind of shape. And the continuation from that point is just clear and apparent to me. It's in front of me, and it's marshaled all my thoughts together. So next day when I go into a maths class, I just proceed. And I didn't control it. I didn't use my dream to think about what I was going to prepare. It just fell into place like that.
Yeah. Is it relevant to this point?
Yes, it is. Because I think what we're talking about is, and it's relevant also to what Krishnamurti, the questions he was raising before, the question of continuity between waking and sleep. And I have a somewhat different view from Monty. I think a different emphasis perhaps about this, because I think that there's much more continuity between waking life and dream life than he's emphasizing. And I wouldn't sort of elevate dreaming to a special kind of state. Psychoanalysts sometimes say that if you understood the first thing the patient says to you at the beginning of 8 years of analysis, if you really understood it, you would understand everything that you came to understand over 8 years. That is to say, folded up in a small piece of behavior is all of that structure which is in the brain. That is, a piece of output from the brain conserves something of the embedded structure within the brain which is giving the person all his trouble. And I think a dream gives a particularly clear representation or conservation of that embedded structure in the brain, but any piece of behavior does, and any fantasy does. The more we let go and stop the world, the more that structure will be outputted directly without a lot of transformations on it. But it's always present in everything that we do, and every action that we do. Every piece of behavior contains all of it. And I think that, in that sense, it's related very much to what David talks about in the whole holographic model, because the whole is contained in each piece of behavior. It's intricate there, but we need the signal, the key, to bring it out, and that may take many years.
I think we were asking
on this question. I wanted to bring that, and I don't know, maybe you can help me, but it seems to me in some way that that's related to what you were talking about yesterday in the issue of effort.
Yes.
In some way or other, that if it's always there, and I agree with you. I mean, what happens when a student comes to me after 10 years of working with this patient and he says, look, I don't know, something is wrong. I say, bring me the notes on the first time you saw this person. And it's all there. Why they can't go anywhere together. Now, somehow or other, it seems to me that's why what you're talking about with effort. Because if it's all there, then there's no reason for effort.
Would you say, sir, if I may I reply, that when you say it's all there, what do you mean?
Well, I mean,
this is the old ancient Hindu theory also, that God or the wholeness is there, inside you. All that you have to do is to peel off, like an onion skin, layer after layer, through effort, through concentration, until it's all there.
No, what I mean is that as Gordan was just saying, that what you're seeing, what the experience now, the controller is the control, the experiencer is the experience. It's all going on.
No, sir. If experiencer is the experience, then the desire for further experience has no meaning.
But that's part of the experiencer at that time.
No.
The experiencer is at that moment, let's say, the desire for more experience. That's what he is.
No, sir, let's understand if I may. What is the desire, the urge for experience? Is it psychological experience? I'm not talking of other kinds of experiences. Experience implies a process of going through. The word go through. That means not retaining the memory of that particular experience. To finish with it. That's generally what it means, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. That I have an experience and it's over. Not carried on. And if I carry it on, it becomes a problem. So, if I understand that properly, then I see the experiencer is the experienced. There is no division. Mm-hmm. Then my urge for psychological experience as God, as all kinds of other experience, becomes a very small affair. So what is the question we are discussing?
Well, the question we're discussing is that inasmuch as that is the case, what is the place of effort in there?
So when we use the word effort to gain something, to be something, to achieve something.
Mm-hmm. To go on, so to speak, beyond the experience.
Become something, go further, better. Mm-hmm. Make more and more progress.
That's what you would call effort, right?
Or trying to be something all the time.
Well, but are you what about trying to be the experiencer is the experience?
That you cannot make an effort to see that. Either it is so or it is not so. Either you see either you see the truth of that the experiencer is the experience, the thinker is the thought. It is so or it is not so. You can't make an effort to be that.
That, I think, is where that's where somehow there gets to be some sort of hang-up there in most people's experience. That in the, let's say that suppose the experience is the experience of trying to get somewhere.
No, sir. Look, thinker is the thought, isn't it?
Yes.
Without thought, is there a thinker?
No.
Be a little bit more.
No, I think thought does create the thinker.
No, thinker is the thought.
Mm-hmm.
Thought is if there is no thought, is there a thinker?
No. Without thought, there might be some sort of ambience of a thinker, some sort of feeling.
One can see. So you express something in words. These words which have a content according to the thought. The thought is expressed by the thinker, who has memories, experience, knowledge, and that knowledge is part of the thinking. The whole of that is thinker and the thought. That's a fact. I mean, that's
right.
Obviously so. And what is the effort? To change thoughts? To control thoughts?
No, because the thinker, the thought becomes one of effort, or the thought becomes one of desire, let's say.
Wait.
Suppose it is thought of desire.
Look, sir, I see a nice car. Impact, sensation, contact sensation.
Yeah.
Then from that sensation there is desire. I love to drive that car. It's mine. Okay. The pleasure of possession and all the rest of it.
Okay.
Now, in that there is an effort, isn't there? Not to possess, all the business of earning money and bother of looking after the car and fuss and all that. But
you've got to go from now, you've got the sensation, you've got to go from here and get the money to get the car.
For God's sake.
You got to. That's your effort. Okay.
Can desire, I look, there's perception, sensation, contact, desire. End there. Not with an effort to end there. It's what? Because I'm going then the whole question of attachment. And then the bother of, you follow? So, effort to be something is contradiction. I observe what I am, not what I should be. I have no ideals. It is so. I am that. I'm angry, I'm jealous, I'm brutal, I'm this and that is so. Not, I don't want to change it to something else. But if I remain with that, with what is, there is a transformation of what is. That's all. It is not, I want to transform. There is a natural transformation.
If I remain with that.
With that, what is.
But if I remain with that, that means that I had to have stopped it before I got to the attachment, or I have to remain with the attachment.
Right. Remain, watch it, and it unfolds.
Unfolds. God gives you the car.
I was interested in what Marsha said about your experiences, because it seemed that for your maths lessons the next day, you could have, if you hadn't had these experiences, you would have had to have thought through your lessons for the next day, which would have involved some effort. That would have, as it were, been the active way of deciding what you were going to say in your... But by, in some way, having these experiences, you manage to bypass from the problem or the question to the solution without going through the active or effortful activity, if you like, of deciding what they were going to be. Now, presumably, the fact that you could have used rational thought to have got there meant that the information was all in your head anyway. But you, using a sort of more passive or psychic pathway, you got to the answer without going through the effort.
I don't think it happened that way at all. There was a time when I used to prepare my lessons very carefully and take the effort. And then when I went into my classroom, it would be an effort. I would take the effort to explain things to my students. And then they wouldn't understand. And then I'd try and explain it to them. And I thought I was doing very well, explaining things to them, and they wouldn't understand what I was saying. And I'd try, and I had it all clear what I was trying to say. That was when I prepared it. Now when I just let it drift through me like this, when I go into my class that morning, as I sit down in front of them, I have very little idea of what I'm going to say. But when I do say it, they understand it. There's communication between us. They're ready to talk. They know what I'm talking about. We see things together. Things come up and we seem to be at liberty to chase them. And they seem to understand better.
So, do you think then that the effort that you put into preparing the lessons in the past creates more effort in having to communicate that rational thought?
Yes.
And that creates a division because you're not, as it were, on the same level as the students who you're trying to communicate with?
Yes, before I was explaining the rational thought to them. Now we just do it together, the rational thought, so they know how to do it.
Just a short point, yes. I find it very difficult, very hard to believe that you can do this all the time, especially with mathematics. I've given mathematics lessons to children, and if I want to explain differential calculus to, say, a 14-year-old child, it takes me about 2 hours to prepare this. And there are many ways you can do it, but there are some ways which are much easier than others. It's a question of which examples you choose and so on, to put them on their level. And I find it very hard to believe that you can do it just intuitively without rational thought, to find good examples, to go into the concepts in the right way and so on. I find it very hard to believe.
Well, I think my answer to that is that I know them very well. I live with them, I eat with them, I dance with them, I play with them, and since I'm with them all the time like that, I do know, because we have this large shared experience, I do know where to pick up the examples and things instinctively.
That means you are with yourself all the time. You're not trying to be something else.
Yes, I suppose you could put it like
That's
that.
it. That's the whole art.
I think Bryan, you had something.
No, it's been clarified.
It's been then, Julian.
Yeah, I'd like to, take up this point that's been skirted around by most people about how what's been said links up with effort. Again, I share Fritjof's, not skepticism, but I don't understand how what you said could be true. I mean, if one lives with a group of people, then you're doing something which one, I suppose, could be called belonging to the practical realm. I mean, you eat, you have all sorts of various types of social intercourse with these people. But teaching mathematics is something, well, it's different. I mean, if you want, it belongs to the theoretical realm. I mean, you have to impart propositional knowledge to people. And the only thing I could say is give you my personal experience. I mean, when I'm lecturing to students about something that's abstract, I make an absolute shambles of it if I just come in and let it flow. I mean, I've got to sit down and prepare it carefully and structure the argument. Now, another related question is this. I mean, it concerns Well, it concerns Krishnamurti's statement that if I make an effort to make an effort to be something is a contradiction. I mean, let me put my difficulty in the form of an example. Let's say that I'm slovenly. I'm very messy. I can't get my house in order. In the very straightforward sense of there's always clothes and garbage all over the place. It's not true, but it's just an example. Now, I resolve, because of pressures from within and without me, from within me and from without, to become non-slovenly, neater. Now, I am what I am, okay, I'm slovenly, but I want to be something else, non-slovenly. Now, I don't understand what it means to say that I can't make an effort to become non-slovenly. Of course I've got to make an effort to become non-slovenly. I've got to take steps to, first of all, take steps to clear the place up, but more important, I've got to take steps to get my mind in the frame, in the sort of condition that I'll always be neat and non-slovenly.
May I answer that question, sir? May I answer that question? Is it physical slovenliness, laziness, or is it mental laziness?
Say it's both.
Right. So if it's physical slovenliness, it has come about because you haven't enough sleep. I'm taking. Ate too much, played too much, indulged too much. All those are contributory causes to being tired, slovenly. Why?
No, say I'm not tired. I'm very alert, but I'm slovenly.
Yes, but you. That's what I said, sir.
And I haven't indulged, really.
No, I said physical slovenliness and mental laziness.
All right.
I'm only taking physical laziness.
Mm-hmm.
Be lazy. What is it? All right, be lazy for that day. What's wrong with it?
Because I know that being lazy is not conducive to
be something else.
That's right. That's right.
That means education has been to compete with somebody, to gain some.
No, it's not competition. I mean, look.
Why should I be? I'm lazy. Look, sir, this morning I was lazy. Just a minute. Because I had to do too much yesterday, so I was lazy. I said, all right, I'm lazy. I just didn't do any yoga.
Mm-hmm.
That is not laziness.
No, you decided not to do
yoga. No, my body said don't do it.
All right.
I'm just as awake as yesterday, or when I woke up, my body said, please, leave me alone.
But that I think applies to both of your questions and Krishnamurti's answer. I think, and the example of mathematics, I think when you reach a state of grace, everything becomes graceful. But until you do that, you have to prepare your lectures, you have to learn to put your shoes on, and so on and so forth, and a great deal.
You've introduced time. You said reach a state of grace. That implies I'm going to go in somewhere from here. I don't know. I'm not. He said. Also, he said you're there. I'm not reaching for anything. I am in a state of grace.
Wait a minute.
Always.
Wait a minute. I'm saying that if in any particular endeavor, once you know your subject matter really well, you can in fact go in completely, as I do in physiological psychology, at 8 o'clock in the morning, my eyes are hardly open, neither is anybody else, and we just rap. But it comes out in a fairly decent, orderly fashion. However, when I was preparing those lectures initially, and you went through that period of initially mastering the subject, and so did Krishnamurti, originally learn how to dress himself and go to the bathroom and not pee in a corner and all of these things. And I'm not so sure in those periods of time, and I think this is what is missing from the doctrine as I hear it, that in those periods of time there wasn't some achieving effort and all of these other things going on. And so if we want to be different and so on, it's a matter of accepting, again, that even simply that to achieve, you have to have effort.
Implies competition.
Not necessarily.
No, it doesn't.
Sometimes cooperation.
May I just...
All right.
Our educational system is comparing A to B, marks, exams, all that. So when you are comparing A with B, you are destroying B, A. Destroying in the same code. So that system has making us all the time compete, compare, imitate, conform, all that follows.
But there's also some simple cooperation.
That's a different matter.
If you're living with someone, for instance, and they're slovenly and you're not, or if you're slovenly and they're not, that causes tension.
Of course.
And now, how do you get around those cooperative?
I see you're tired. Really, stay in bed. I'll look after all the kitchen.
Oh, wonderful.
I have done this.
Yes, you have to really do that. Then.
I have done it.
Yes.
You stay in bed. I'll get all the breakfast ready. For God's sake, don't let us fuss about it. There's no tension.
This is what's called an adult.
Karl, look, I reckon that, I probably know as much about let's say, the first order propositional calculus as you know about basic physiological psychology.
Can't you just go in and...
Not teach it. I could, but it wouldn't be as ordered and as structured.
Maybe you shouldn't teach
Well,
Maybe you should educate them.
But why shouldn't I be lazy?
Because I don't want to be lazy. You see, you refuse to, I think, this is how it seems to me, you refuse to allow a distinction within people of being in state A but not wanting to be in state A. You feel that is in some way not possible. If you're in state A, just let yourself be. But I don't want to be in state A. I don't want to be lazy.
No. On the contrary, I say, if you're in the state of A, don't compare, don't force. Watch that state of A. Be with it. Look at it. Go, let it inform you. Let the map of A unroll. And it'll tell you all that.
But he's telling you that state A includes both state A and not wanting to be in state A.
That's right. In other words, I have looked at it, I've ridden with it, and I don't like it. I want to get off.
Wait. Now, why do you want... What is the other state you want to get into? Not to be lazy?
Okay, now I won't fall into I won't say B, because then you're going to say, you're comparing...
No.
I'll just say not A. That's all. I don't want to be in state A.
Why?
I reduce it to propositions. You're in state A. That's where you are.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be in state A.
That's what you are.
Now you're in state A and you don't want to be in state A. This is state B.
Not necessarily, because B might be described in such a way that it is neither...
I just described it. State B is the state of being in state A and not wanting to be in state A.
No, I think this is unfair, because if you give a lecture, several of us have lectured, and different people have different standards of how a good lecture goes. One person might decide that if you get caught halfway through in the propositional calculus, it is a disaster. That another person may say, well, that just shows that if you are sloppy, you will get a sloppy result. But if you are unhappy with your bad lecture, that is not the same as giving a good lecture. Some of us have feeling that you must prepare.
Responsibility to the students is another thing.
Pardon me?
A responsibility to your students to give a good lecture.
Right.
We're talking about responsibility in another context.
Right. What I'm saying is that if you say that you are giving a bad lecture, and you feel that you have not prepared and that is a bad state of affairs, that recognition is not enough. That is probably the prelude, but it is not enough to be giving a good lecture. You must go and prepare. Now, I can quite explain the kind of situation that Harsh finds himself in, that very often you have worked a number of steps which are necessary for orderly presentation of the subject under almost all possible conditions. Not as preparation for the lecture, but in terms of just what has bothered you. You ask the question, suppose you did not know this and this, and you wanted to understand this one, where would you go? If you have most of these things sort of worked out for yourself, then I can see that this contact with people together with, letting yourself go, prepares the lecture. Sometimes, I don't know whether other people have this, I prepare a lecture very hard, but then go and give an entirely different lecture. It would be a very ordered lecture, and you wonder why you spend several hours preparing this 1 hour lecture, and it turns out that you have not given. But in a sense that was necessary, because after seeing the thing, your mind has decided in its own wisdom that maybe that is not such a good presentation it can come up with. So it may be that the state of letting yourself go only sorts out the steps that you have already worked out. That you had, it's not only the preparation for the thing, but a number of different steps may have come through at a certain stage. But I would also very much like to hear an answer to his question from you. It seems to me that you have given us the slip and discussed something else which is quite important. Namely, if you are in a certain state and you are unhappy with that state, you are dissatisfied with that state, you have already changed the state because you are a sloppy person who does not want to be sloppy. That is different from a sloppy person who is completely relaxed about it.
No, so as you say, I'm unhappy and with something. I'm unhappy with my laziness. I remain with my unhappiness. I don't want to be happy. I remain with that. I say, yes, I'm unhappy with it. And I go into it. I say, why? I see it.
But then doesn't one get up and clean yourself up?
I may not.
Yes, but I may. I mean...
you may or may not. But I'm just saying, if I'm lazy in the morning, I'm lazy in the morning. I say, yes, I remain with it. I'm not unhappy with it.
When I said lazy, I meant a general character disposition, not just lazy at a particular discrete bit of time.
Now you're entering quite a different thing.
Well, no, I mean...
When you said sluggishness...
Slovenly meaning a general disposition that I have to be slovenly.
No, it seems to me that there seem to be two different directions in which you can... If you are slovenly and unhappy about or dissatisfied with the thing, you are in disorder and misery. There seem to be two directions to go. One is to say, well, I am slovenly and I am unhappy about it, but I am slovenly and that's it.
But
then you become
pardon
me? And then you decide that you are not unhappy about it. That's the way of the pig. There is the other way.
I'm not quite a pig. I won't admit that yet.
Pigs are very lovable. They're very lovable creatures.
The other way to go is to say, by God, I'm going to do something about it.
And make an effort. A bit with a capital E. Big, strong effort. And get out of the state.
I understand this very well.
And not have a tension or repentance about the fact that I was slovenly, but then decide that I'm going to... And then I have gone to the other state, then again I am reasonably happy. Sometimes I am unhappy, but reasonably happy, saying that, well, now I am reasonably
So what is the question?
So then there seems to be some amount of effort. Now,
in what?
In deciding that to shake myself off my slothfulness and then go and clean up the mess.
Look, this morning I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to come down. And body said, all right, lie down for a while. I lay down for an hour. Just not thinking, nothing. I meditate, all the rest of it. Just absolute. Then I got up. There was no effort. I got up.
What would have happened if you had... Well, it's hard to say. I mean, what would...
Why did
Suppose it got to be 10:45 and you didn't get up.
Because I won't keep you all waiting. I don't want to keep you waiting. Politeness, courtesy, consideration, affection, all the rest of it. I just got up.
But the body still says, look, I've been...
No, it didn't.
No.
Never felt an effort.
But don't we want to transcend giving each other, and we're all doing it, in this particular example, giving each other bits and pieces of autobiography?
No, this is not autobiography.
No, I say that with respect and non-pejorative, in a sense. I mean, I could have been in your sort of situation, and, I'd then say, damn, I've got to get up, and I have to make a big effort, so I get up. In other words, I could put myself in exactly the same sort of situation that you just gave us, but I would describe the way I got out of that state in a different way. I didn't sort of gently flow out of it without making an effort. I made a big effort, explosive big effort, and jumped out of bed. I mean, but it seems to me that is not...
That's your problem, that you make an effort. And the making of the
Why is it a problem?
And the wanting is, I think...
But you see that... Yes, but right now, I don't understand what it means that's my problem. I've succeeded in doing... I'm here.
It depends whether one feels there's a problem or not, partly, doesn't it?
If one feels there's no problem, then it's not an issue, whether one does it or
Well,
not.
I think that I agree with you in this sense that the Eastern philosophy is extremely useful and gets us to a certain way of living.
This is not Eastern philosophy.
No, I know, but whatever, it's close enough. Well, it's yours.
Karl, who are you agreeing with now? Sorry.
You.
But
could I wonder if the following helps to clarify it at all. I mean, Krishnamurti spoke earlier about the possibility or non-possibility of teaching people to love. Well, I think that one would agree that it isn't possible to love by making an effort. Now, I think the psychoanalysts would also agree that the patient, oppressed by the most terrible problems, cannot solve these in spite of all his individual effort. Now, is it not true that in all really important things in our lives, we don't make these changes by effort?
Could I reply? Because it seems to be...
It's the rest, yes.
I would say, and it's going to sound paradoxical to most of you here probably, that I think it does make sense to make an effort, even when one speaks of loving someone. And the effort in this case, for example, would come... I mean, you meet a person, you begin to get to know him well, or her well, and you realize that she or he has a lot of character traits, some of which attract you, some of which you don't like so much. Now, you could definitely make an effort to, if not ignore, then lessen the importance of, yes, the very nasty traits in that other person, and come to accept the sort of neutral ones, and etc. So, in other words, I would suggest that it makes sense to speak of effort even in this case.
So you feel you can love your wife although you think she has very nasty aspects?
Of course.
Not all about Sorry, I'm not being personal. I have this problem too.
Because I happen to be his wife. Now, the thing is, I wanted to talk about this because actually what Julian's talking about when he talks about, he gave this example of being slovenly, he's actually talking about me. He's not talking about him, he's talking about me. Now, the fact is that this was, I wouldn't say it was a great problem, but I am not naturally, that's not the right word, I have a habit that I've grown into of being untidy. I wouldn't say I'm particularly happy about it, but I am also, when I'm on my own, not particularly unhappy about it either. The fact is that when I come into contact with someone else, i.e. Julian, who I love, and who is at the other end of the spectrum, in that he's overly tidy, then something has to happen, right? Something has to happen for us to be able to cooperate. And what has happened is that I have made an effort through my love to be more tidy, and Julian has made an effort through his love to be a little less obsessional, if you like. And I think the thing is that we have both approached each other in a cooperative way. There are still a few problems, but they're not as great as. But there was an effort involved, and the effort was in the cooperation needed to show that I, in fact, can love him. Now, you might say, it shouldn't have been an effort because the love should have made it possible for you to have done this without any effort. The fact that you love that person or want to express your love should have been enough so that you tidied up all your papers and everything was a joy because you wanted to express your love through doing that. Well, in a sense that might be right, but I think there was still a certain effort involved.
I'd like to finish my statement now in view of what you've just said. I think this, what I would call an act of will and effort, is necessary to accomplish, to achieve. Now, you have said over and over again, accomplishment and achievement, and these things, let us not do them, you see. And I'm saying the Western culture in fact, is built on achieving and so on. And I don't want to.
I'm afraid Indian culture too, sir.
It is now, yes. I think.
Oh, even before.
Even before.
I want to achieve nirvana, all kinds of, you know.
Well, all I'm saying is I feel that there is a place for both things, but that maybe we've become too lopsided on the side of achieving and effortful ways of going about things, and that we haven't really, in our everyday education, been exposed to the effortless ways of getting to the same place.
Yes, but I think, I mean, I agree with you, but I don't even think that the link between effort and achievement is as strong as you've just stated. I mean, I think one could meaningfully speak of effort without having to speak of achievement. And then the other position, it seems to me, from my point of view, becomes even less tenable if one severs some of the threads that link effort and achievement. In other words, one could make efforts to get out of certain states which don't necessarily have anything to do with achievement.
So as Professor Wilkins has pointed out, in great things, if you make effort, it's lost its perfume. It's finished. That's what we're talking about, aren't we, sir?
But that's an empirical point which may or may not be true for some but not other people. That's all.
No.
I think I've grown to see.
You want to speak now?
Well, just to put this discussion in the frame of reference that I started with, if you can remember that far back, I don't think that we're ever engaged in any kind of undiluted activity. I think all of our activity is a combination of autonomous strivings and homonymous strivings. And I think what characterizes autonomous strivings, for the most part, is effort, because it's synonymous with mastery. I think what characterizes our homonymous strivings...
Holonymous, let's change it to homonymous. Sounds too much like a homonym.
Our homonymous strivings are basically, and in their fundamental nature, effortless. Otherwise, they're nothing at all.
I had a technical question to ask. With regard to your black dot,
very nice.
Is this, could it be cognition, could it be response, could it be reception during the state of no dream at all? What is technically in Indian culture known as deep sleep?
Well, the only evidence we have of what's going on at that point that we can recover, because we're at a disadvantage. We can't zero in and know directly. So we recover certain information, and there, what we tend to recover is something more akin to waking thought, fragments, sometimes imagery, not the disconnected and emotionally laden imagery of the real dream state, but something approaching that sometimes, and sometimes just what sound like residual stray thoughts from our waking state. So my preference at this point is to just put a big question mark around that black dot and say, we don't know where or how it relates to what we're talking about, that it may be a strange phenomenon that's connected with some kind of disconnecting process. In other words, that our transitions from so-called deep sleep to dreaming sleep to waking sleep may not be a continuous. It may be a discontinuous process that for a moment opens up a different kind of universe.
I just say it's 5 minutes to 1, so we should have most one some brief questions. If you have a brief one.
A brief one. I just wanted to take up the question of the instantaneous dream, because I think that brings up something. You gave an amusing example of someone who was hit on the back of the head and he thought he had been guillotined. And from that you concluded that it was an instantaneous dream. But that conclusion was drawn from some preconception that you had about time. Because if you didn't have that preconception, you could have instead come to the conclusion that he had a precognition in his dream of that thing going to hit him. And so, in fact, his dream did start 5 seconds earlier.
All right, I think that's an interesting alternative explanation. I certainly consider it.
Is it brief?
Just tiny. I mean, the doc shouldn't really, it needn't worry you too much. I mean, it could function like any other theoretical construct. You have an apparatus. You have to, so you posit it to do the sort of job that a starting point would have to do. But I mean, one doesn't even have to, perhaps, in logic terms, quantify over it. It's just, it's a posit that you may even be just a heuristic device. It's not a.
This afternoon is free, as we have the outing, and tomorrow morning we start at the same time.